This is the thing about bourbon. When you're starting a new brand, you're spending money to lay down product that you cannot sell for 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
So by lay down, put it in the barrel. And I think the first year we laid down like maybe 10,000 barrels.
Startup costs aren't the only reason that the whiskey business is a risky business. Fawn Weaver launched her spirits company, Uncle Nearest Premium Whiskey, in 2017. She faced entrenched, nearly monopolistic competition from international conglomerates, scads of regulations, reams of red tape, and an industry unaccustomed to seeing a Black woman in charge. But Fawn was on a mission into which she had poured nearly every single penny she had.
There were absolutely times where account is overdrawn. It is so close to zero. We had nothing that we could call our own.
But Fawn was so determined because her bourbon was about more than just business. She wanted to lift a brilliant Black distiller out of the footnotes of history and into the spotlight. Now she's doing something remarkable, blitzscaling a bourbon brand. Uncle Nearest is valued at more than $1 billion. I'm Jeff Berman, your host. Fawn Weaver is using every ounce of her experience as a marketer, an investor, and an author to fuel the rise of Uncle Nearest Premium Whiskey. She never meant to get into the beverage business. Her obsession with the story of Uncle Nearest started as an idea for a book. Fawn, welcome to Masters of Scale.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure to have you. I want to start by having you take us back to your 40th birthday. You decided to take a trip.
I did.
Some people want to go to Greece.
Yes.
Some people want to go to a beach or
Yeah.
a mountain.
Yeah.
You chose to go to
Lynchburg, Tennessee.
Why?
Because that is where the story of Nearest Green was. And I had read on the cover of the New York Times International Edition, and the headline was, Jack Daniel's embraces a hidden ingredient. The credit for being Jack Daniel's teacher and mentor was given to a white man by the name of Dan Caw, a preacher and a distiller. And the community believed that it was actually an enslaved man on his property, Nearest Green, that was the actual teacher, that was the actual mentor. So that's what the story was about. I think the reason why it struck a chord with me is up until that point, I was almost 40 years old, and I couldn't tell you a single ubiquitous American brand where we could say there was an African American at the start. But there's zero chance that we weren't at the beginning of a lot of these companies, but we weren't allowed to patent, we weren't allowed to trademark. And so we have no way of knowing what our role was. And so that intrigued me. The internet decided almost instantaneously with the headline and the photo that Jack Daniel was a slave owner. He hid the recipe, he stole the recipe, he hid the slave. That was not a part of the story. It was not even insinuated. But that is the story that social media ran with, and then I ordered a book called Jack Daniel's Legacy. The book is dedicated to him. The people that are interviewed in the book are all the people who knew him best. His nephew, who he turned the distillery over to 4 years before he passed away. His great nephews that then took over the distillery after that. Just people who were either touched him or one degree of separation from him. I expect that maybe in the book it would refer to an African American or an enslaved man. I never expected to see Nearest mentioned by name. And I was shocked that from the very early pages, Nearest Green, his boys George Green and Eli Green, were mentioned throughout the book.
So this is a hidden figure story where the hidden figures are actually hiding in plain sight.
Where the hidden figures aren't hidden at all.
Right.
What I wanted to do was spend time in the library, because when I was doing research in my rabbit hole from Los Angeles, when I was doing the research, what kept coming up, every photo that involved an African American from Lynchburg, Tennessee, it all said Moore County Library. So I just figured I was going to go into Moore County Library and just flip through lots and lots and lots of photos. But then a woman walked in after I told the assistant librarian what I was looking for, and a woman came in and as it turned out, second eldest descendant of Jack Daniel. And after I talked to her for probably about maybe 5 minutes, and I shared with her why I was there. I told her that I thought the social media had the story wrong. I did not believe that her ancestor was what they were saying he was. I believed that the story between Jack and Nearest was a story of love, honor, and respect. I shared with her what research I had done from afar that led me to that conclusion. And she said, in that case, I want to help you.
I want to pause for a second because it is extraordinary what happens when we start with the presumption of good intent.
Absolutely.
And we build a bridge before we begin a conversation about anything that might be harder.
Yeah.
And what a stunning moment in that library, and maybe serendipity, but maybe providence.
Yeah.
That she came in and you had this conversation the way you had it.
Yes.
It's extraordinary.
It absolutely is. And what she said before she left, and mind you, she was only in the library maybe 15 minutes. And she said, you know that book that you read, referring to Jack Daniel's legacy. She said, you know, the property where Jack grew up, where everything happened, it's for sale.
You ended up buying this land.
We did.
Which was the original home of
Jack Daniel Distillery No. 7.
Fawn and her husband bought the property, more than 300 acres in Tennessee. They were sold on the idea when they discovered that part of the home was a pristine time capsule from the early distillery days.
The wallpaper was hand-painted roses, and behind the wallpaper was the insulation, which was newspaper. And every single newspaper that was used for installation was written October 10th or October 11th, 1898.
Wow.
Then you went into the boys' room, and someone was barrel stencil practicing all over the walls.
Fawn moved to Lynchburg and went into an even deeper research rabbit hole. She unearthed piles of old photos and historical documents. She also interviewed countless relatives of nearest green. Along the way, she heard a common request from those relatives. The best way to memorialize their ancestor? Put his name on a bottle. Fawn couldn't shake the idea. She started learning everything she could about how to start a whiskey brand, and quickly found that, to put it mildly, it's a complicated industry. Many of those complications date back to the Prohibition era.
The entire time of Prohibition, the mob is running the liquor business. Then at the end of it, the mobs, all of a sudden, the politicians in their pockets have this brilliant idea. Well, we should make sure the mob is never allowed to run the liquor business again. So let's create a middle tier so that the suppliers can never be the buyers. The person who's making it can't also own a restaurant. They can't own a bar. They can't sell directly to the people who are buying liquor.
So there's someone who can make it and someone who can sell it to the customer directly, and then there's someone in the middle who's distributing it.
Correct.
Yeah.
Now, here's the challenge, though, is that happened, but somehow every single person in that second tier is named Billy, Joey, Louie, like everybody. And now all of these generations later, that's not changed.
Yeah.
And so it is a really difficult business to get into because there's a lack of familiarity of both women in power and business in the industry and people of color.
And you've got the intersection of both.
And I have the intersection of both. And so imagine coming into this industry and thinking, okay, well, I'll just, take it straight to the consumer.
Right.
No, you won't.
Right.
Absolutely you won't. And so the challenge with that second tier, their bills are paid for and their bonuses are paid for by big guys.
And that's a huge challenge because you could create the best whiskey in the world, but if you can't persuade a distributor to actually sell your product to the end customer,
exactly,
you've got nothing.
You have nothing.
So what did you do to figure out, one, how do we make this?
Yeah.
And then two, how do we crack that distribution?
Yeah, so the how do we make this was quite fortuitous. The realtor who we bought the home from, she said, if you ever decide to put his name on a bottle, I'll come out of retirement to make sure you get it right.
Wow.
So as it turned out, real estate was basically her second career. She spent her entire life in the family business. And when she left Jack Daniel Distillery, she was the head of whiskey operations. So she knew exactly how to get the product right and how to get that in the bottle. So that piece wasn't the issue. It is the cost and the influence of being able to get your product on shelves. And so it was really, the process that I took to do this, I don't know that I would recommend it for anybody. It was very risky. So in our industry, the norm is you start off in one state, in a single state. And then within about 7 years, if you're able to build traction in that single state, then you'll try to get into maybe 4 states that connect to that one state. So everything is still touching. Everything you can still kind of drive to it in a day,
right,
type of thing. And then from there, hopefully after about 25 years, you've built something. That's how things have been built for the most part. In my instance, I thought, there's never been a woman or a person of color to ever succeed in this industry. So I can't take the path that they're suggesting because everyone else has failed. This country is 70% women and people of color. And we have failed in this industry across the board. I want to get into all 50 states in less than 2 years. And the reason that I wanted to do that is because I knew the only way that I could level the playing field with the hundreds of millions of dollars that they were spending, the big guys were spending in marketing.
Yeah.
Only way I could level the playing field is I would need to use unearned media to help me to tell the story. Well, national press has no interest in doing a regional story. They want a national story.
Yeah.
Well, if I'm only in 3 states, I'm regional.
I mean, Fawn, if you're George Clooney or Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, sure, there's a path to that.
Yeah.
You're a first-time liquor entrepreneur building a brand that has an incredible story behind it, but has none of that.
Yeah.
So how do you make that happen?
Well, the first thing that I did was people in the industry on the spirit side, they had this belief that awards don't matter. If you got San Francisco, double gold, best in class, that was the only one that they believed mattered. Again, I like going against the grain and I like proving people wrong. I don't know what that trait comes from, but it is just in me. And so my thought process was, well, maybe people don't care about winning an award. But if we became the most awarded bourbon in the world out the gate, they would care. And I knew we had a head of whiskey operations with 31 years of experience. I knew that we could make an incredible product, that we could blend an incredible product. And so I decided, I told Kate, our chief business officer, I said, submit us into every award competition around the world. We began doing that before we ever put a bottle in the marketplace.
Wow.
Because we only had so much time and so much money.
Right.
So we had to get consumers talking about us even before the distributors were taking us on.
You pushed all your chips in on the strategy.
Everything.
Yeah. And you didn't raise venture. You
still haven't.
Right. And so how did you fund this?
The very first investor was my husband's former employer. And he did not like the plan at all. Now, mind you, my business plan was really good. It was solid.
I'm sure.
But it did have to take into account with the SWOT analysis that a massive threat was if Brown-Forman, who owned Jack Daniels, decided to wage a war against us. And they could wage a quiet war. They could have opposed our trademark filings.
Yep.
And that would have been very costly. And yes, in the end, we would have won, but then we would have had no money left to actually build the brand. When
you were talking to your husband's former employer and other prospective investors, were you leaning into this threat to the business?
I was.
We talk about doing, because it's a move that I think very few people actually do, of saying, here are the reasons not to invest in us.
Absolutely.
Talk about how you did that, if you would.
So we leaned into it. And I tell entrepreneurs all the time, when you're doing your business plan, if you're only looking at all of the strengths, you're missing a huge part. That the weaknesses and the threats are important, because if you can't answer how you're going to maneuver around those, how you're going to win, then investors are not going to be comfortable. I absolutely leaned into it and said, listen, this could happen, this could happen, this could happen, but the greatest rewards always come from the greatest risks.
Yeah.
And so I didn't shy away from the fact that they were massive risks.
Right. For all of our strengths and opportunities, here are the weaknesses and threats.
Absolutely.
But here's how I intend to handle them.
Yep.
And so that gave him the confidence to put the money in?
Well, that and the fact that I think he really knew that the way that I was wired, that if I lost his money, I'd spend the rest of my life working to make sure that some business venture that I had paid him back.
Yeah.
Not because I ever said that, but to know me is to know I'm wired that way.
Yeah, it's integrity.
I'm not going to guarantee your money. I can't do that. I mean, legally, I'd have SEC all over me if I did that. I can't do that. But what I can say is I was confident that if it went south and I lost the money, I would figure out how to get it back.
Okay. So you started raising some capital. You didn't sell too much of the business to anyone. You've held on to control of it. You started making the whiskey.
Yes.
You started winning the awards
that
you set out to win.
Yes.
Is that when the distributors started saying, oh, like how did you get them to the place of saying we're ready to take you national?
The press.
The press.
I give all credit to the press because even before we began winning the awards, they just allowed me to come in to share the story.
Okay.
And to share the story behind the brand. And at the time that Uncle Nearest, when we created Uncle Nearest, that was the first time in history that an African American had been commemorated on a spirit bottle, any spirit. And so the way that I really did it was I would go to them, and I did a lot of these pitches myself, and I'd say, look at all these bourbons you have. Which one is not a white male? Just any of them. And so I think that it was a bit of a wake-up call for them because no one had ever asked the question before. And so then they're thinking through all of the bourbon brands that they had ever represented and realizing, yes, our country is 70% women and people of color, and you have never had a bourbon brand that commemorated either. They thought, well, we can't say no. But here's the thing. Not saying no and having any idea how to sell my brand are two very different things. So this is how we got the distributors on board. As I told them, I didn't expect them to do anything but drop off the product. I would build the team. We would sell the brand. We would do the work. They would be a high-price FedEx. But I told them all at the very beginning, there will come a time where we are going to build this brand and I am going to have an expectation that you will no longer be a high-price FedEx. But I'll let you know when we get there.
But in the meantime, we'll go to the BevMo's or the Costco's
We're going to
or
go
whoever
everywhere.
it is.
We would do it ourselves. We had no expectation of them in those first couple of years. And so we built the entire thing out without having the distributors in mind, other than saying, drop off the product.
Wow.
Because we legally need you to drop off the product, but we will do the work.
So you were going, selling the story, explaining why this matters, explaining the quality of the drink as well, and fighting for that precious shelf space
Yes.
and promotion, whatever else they might give you.
Absolutely.
Just it's hand to hand.
Absolutely. And it is the nature of the distributor world, even to this day, it's not static. It's constantly changing. It's constantly moving around. Their dynamics are constantly changing.
Yeah.
And so I'm always having to refigure that out.
Well, what's fascinating part about this is it is in some ways a counterintuitive approach to scale because you are going door to door.
It's exactly what we're
selling, but because you weren't just doing Tennessee, Kentucky, Georgia, Alabama, like the start in one state and go regional, you were able to get it out everywhere, which I imagine created a virtuous cycle because now the press is picking up more.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then as there's a little bit of success, then from that little bit of success, then we're able to share that and the press picks up that little bit of success. And it just kind of continued every single time. I think a lot of people are not very good about bragging about their brands. But the thing is that consumers actually like that. Being humble about your brand is not the way to go. You can be humble in your life, but don't be humble in your brand. You have to brag because that's what consumers care about. That is what the press cares about. And if you are going to go toe to toe with big boys that are spending hundreds of millions of dollars on marketing and you don't have that ability, you better know how to tell your story 10 different ways from Sunday.
I'm curious because this is really a blitzscaling journey in a category where blitzscaling
does not happen. Yes, it is.
So, and when you're blitzscaling, things break.
They do.
And you have to let some fires burn. You have to attend to others.
Yeah.
Was there a moment or an incident where you said, "Oh, my Lord, this is we're not going to make it"?
This is the thing about bourbon. When you're starting a new brand, it's a very difficult thing because you're spending money to lay down product that you cannot sell for 4 years. So by lay down, put it in the barrel. Let's call it, prices have gone up in terms of grains and barrels and all the rest of that. But at that time, I think it was just about $700 for all in for a barrel.
For a barrel.
And I think the first year we laid down like maybe 10,000 barrels that I can't sell for 4 years now. But add on top of that, I actually need product to be able to build the brand, to be able to justify paying for that.
Yep.
So there were absolutely times where account is overdrawn. It is so close to zero. In our instance, the only reason the checks didn't bounce is my husband kept a full-time job at Sony Pictures. We had nothing. that we could call our own.
Was there a moment where that flipped, where all of a sudden you were able to breathe?
I don't think I'm breathing yet because the thing is that we are still going at such a pace. We're acquiring other companies because one of the things I discovered coming into it is a single brand dies in this industry.
Yeah.
I might say to a room full of consumers, I say the name Bacardi, and people think of rum. But if you're in this industry, that's not what you think of when someone says Bacardi. You think of Patron tequila. You think of, Grey Goose. And that's because they are now a conglomerate that has all of these other pillars of business. And so you can just go in with that one portfolio and take care of the whole restaurant. They want you to have more stuff that they can put on their back bar if they're going to give you that meeting, because it doesn't take them any longer for you to pitch them on your tequila, your rum, your bourbon, than it does for you to just pitch them on your bourbon.
It's hard enough to win the hill. Then you got to defend it.
Then you have to defend it.
Right.
And so it is a challenge because we're constantly scaling. And we're not just scaling Uncle Nearest, but then we just acquired a vodka company, and then we became the largest Grand Champagne vineyard owner in the city of Cognac to raise up a cognac company. There is so much money that goes out the door every single day. So I can't tell you. I will probably say when all of those companies are built and doing well, maybe I will breathe then. But I'm definitely not there yet.
I mean, it's so interesting because we have this fabled story of the entrepreneur who is maxing out credit cards and, a partner is keeping a full-time job and that salary is keeping everything afloat.
Yeah.
And that feels like the heart is pounding every day moment. You're at 100 million plus in revenue, $1 billion plus in valuation, and you're still feeling that.
It does not change. And I think that is something that people don't understand. The bigger you are, the more money you need. The more you're trying to grow, the more you're trying to acquire, the more you need. Now, for those who just decide, okay, I'm going to sell and just sit back, yeah, that's an option. And then, yes, they are just kind of sitting pretty. But then here's the thing, and plenty that have done this. They all regret it afterwards because now they're trying to find their next best thing.
Yeah.
And then they realize, okay, there's only so many trips you can go on, so many boats you can travel on, and now you're bored.
So many people in your position would have done that by now and said, I'm going to take the pressure off. I'm going to cash out. I bet everything and it's paid off.
Yeah.
You're not doing that.
The moment I came into this industry, the purpose wasn't to build a whiskey company. It was cement the legacy of Nearest Green. And once I got in, I understood that wasn't possible unless this brand began to go toe to toe. And it doesn't have to be this generation, but it has to be set up in future generations to be alongside Jim Beam and Johnny Walker and Jack Daniel. That's the goal. Well, they've got a 160-year head start.
Yeah. As you're scaling a company through these phases, it can be very hard to maintain your culture principles, to keep people on the same train that you're driving. I know that you've got 10 principles for your company. What's your favorite one?
We do it with excellence or not at all. Our guiding principles are literally living principles. If you talk to anyone in my company, they know the guiding principles. Most will always refer back to principle number 3, which is every day we pound the rock. And that comes from, it is not the first 100 blows to that rock, but that 101st that cracks.
Yeah.
You can't say it was that one blow that did it. It was the 100th that came before it. So this every day we pound the rock notion is something that we talk about in our company constantly. You will see my team members post on Facebook a lot, hashtag pound the rock, and which I got that from San Antonio. I got that from Popovich and RC Buford over there. Ours are living, breathing. We didn't bring in some PR firm or branding company to put these guiding principles in place. I literally wrote in the very early years of our company, I think maybe we had 10 employees. I wrote 10 guiding principles. And I did it after reading Ray Dalio's book, Principles.
Oh, wow.
And I said, okay, we need principles. First of all, I sent that book to everyone. And then I said, we need principles. And so I wrote our first 10. And then I sent it to everyone. And I said, get rid of the ones that you don't think are as important as other ones that you have.
Interesting.
And we went round and round with people removing someone else's, putting in something that they thought was more important. And we went round and round. It took us, it took us a full year to get to the 10 principles that we have. And so there was buy-in from the leadership from the very beginning. Well, that leadership is still with me.
Yeah.
And so we are living out those principles, but we don't just have guiding principles. And I don't know how many people have this, but I wrote out also 10 hiring principles. And the hiring principles are identical to the guiding principles in terms of action items. So when someone is doing an interview, when a leader is doing an interview in my company, they have the hiring principles. Each one has a checkbox. And so the we do it with excellence or not at all will actually go to a hiring principle that mirrors it. And if that person is interviewing and they can't check every single box, that person doesn't make it to me
9 out
for
of
the
10
fun.
doesn't cut it.
No, it's got to be 10 out of 10.
I want to go to one of your other principles, which really struck me,
Yeah.
which is we pull as we climb.
We do.
What does that mean?
That means that we cannot do this by ourselves. It's not any good if we succeed and everybody else is still left behind. We're still, in this industry, we're still the only one. Again, 70% women and people of color.
What's really striking about this, which I hadn't clocked, is this is both an internal and an external principle.
Yes, it is.
We're going to lift up internally, but also we're going to contribute to the ecosystem that has contributed to us.
Absolutely. And we're going to make sure that when we all move on from this industry, that when we all move on to the next life, that we've left this industry looking so remarkably different than when we came into it. And to be able to leave that kind of a footprint, and I don't look at it as it's important for people to attribute it to us or to attribute it to me or to attribute it to our team. I don't look at it that way. I think what's important is that 2 generations from now, people would have no idea that our industry at one point was almost 100% white male.
Another way that Fawn focuses on the we pull as we climb principle is through her ongoing relationship with the descendants of Nearest Green.
They brought me in and supported me so early on in this journey. The only thing that they knew is that Nearest Green made the whiskey for Jack. All of the other details have come through my research. And each green that I know has read the book now. And then what I did when I brought them all together is on where the original distillery number 7, the original Jack Daniel distillery, where it was on the property, the water still runs through there the same way that it did. And you can drink directly from the water. It's filtered by the limestone. And so we basically pitched this huge event tent right where distillery number 7 was. And I took clothespins, and the entire ceiling was covered with these clothespins, and hanging from the clothespins were photos of their ancestors, military records, birth certificates, death certificates, marriage certificates. And so there were all these things that I had found. So as they're walking through, they're like, wait, I know that person. I know that name. Wait, that's my name. I got my name from that uncle. And so to watch their absolute wonder.
Phenomenal.
Even before we sold the first bottle of Uncle Nearest, we began paying for all the Green descendants to go to college. So if you're of college age, all you got to do is get into a college. And then once you get in, you just have to maintain a 3.0 and you've got a full ride.
Wow.
And we've done that very early on. So now the family gets together as these graduations are happening.
Fawn, we're going to head into a bit of a lightning round if that's okay. What's your favorite way to drink Uncle Nearest?
Neat.
Neat.
I love Uncle Nearest neat. No ice, no sugar, no anything. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love a great cocktail if I go to a bar. But if I'm at home, it's usually neat.
Well, it's that good.
It is.
What's your latest research rabbit hole?
It's really funny. My latest research rabbit hole has been King Asa. I don't know why I'm fascinated in Chronicles and in the Book of Kings, 2 Kings. It just mentions this king very briefly. But what I've always been fascinated by is every king before him just had nonstop wars. And every king after him had nonstop wars. But King Asa, it says, and the Lord gave him rest. And because I love rest. And I think it's really important. I think we're a sleep-deprived country, which is why, so many things are happening that probably shouldn't be. But I love this notion that a king was given rest. And so so that's been my deep dive, is trying to figure out who the heck was this guy.
Is there any other habit that you have that has been critical to your success that we haven't talked about?
2 things. Rest we've talked about. I think that has been absolutely critical because the decisions that I have to make sometimes are lightning fast. And if I am not rested, the likelihood that those will be pretty big mistakes is high.
Yep.
The other thing I would say is that teaching myself not to worry. Entrepreneurs spend a whole lot of time worrying. They're up at night.
Yeah.
And the challenge with that is that when you worry, you shut down the part of your brain that you need the most to be able to troubleshoot, to come up with creative solutions. We don't mean to do that, but that's what we do. And years ago, I was a massive worrier, where to a place where I actually went to UCLA to do a sleep study where they pinned me up because I just could not sleep at night. I thought something was wrong, and I had to go to the doctor because I had heart palpitations. So I really did a lot of worrying. And so I bought a book by Dale Carnegie. The book's got to be 80 years old. You know this book, How to Stop Worrying and Start Living?
Yep.
Right? And so I read the book, and it has all these different tricks and trades, but there was one that really resonated with me.
Which one?
And it was to write down everything that you are worrying about, put it in an envelope. And I literally put it in the back of my desk, and I committed to not think about anything that was in the envelope. Now, don't get me wrong, I still worried about another 20 other things, but I committed to myself I wouldn't worry about the things that were in that envelope. And those were the things that had been keeping me up at night. Those are the things that I could barely get anything done because I was so fixated on fixing those things. And after a while, I completely forgot about the envelope. And I remember going back to it, I think maybe a year later, and reading those things. And my God, they were foolish. Like, they were absolutely silly. And so what I began thinking about from that day was, how many other things did I allow to rob me of moments of life and joy and progress because I was worrying about it and they never came true?
Fawn, when you're feeling stuck or unsure about a big decision, who do you talk to, or what do you do to get to the answer?
Yeah. For me, it's super, super simple. I have just a foundation of faith. That's where we start with this. The person who I speak to the most is my husband, the most, about everything. However, there are so many things that I deal with that it is, if I went to him every single time, number one, he wouldn't be able to get anything done. And also, it would be very stressful for him. And so my process is very simple. It involves a lot of prayer, but I've had the same prayer for almost 30 years. If this is your will, then open the door in a manner in which no man can close it, including myself. If it is not your will, close the door in a manner in which no man can open it, including myself. So what that does is I'm just constantly going through open doors. Lit pass, open doors. I think Matthew McConaughey called it green light. If the door closes, that means that's not for me. But what I don't do is stand on the outside of the door second guessing whether or not I should go through the door. I go through the door with absolute abandon without second guessing it.
Well, I'm walking out of this so inspired and so grateful for you for living your purpose and for living it so authentically, and for coming here and sharing your story, and for inspiring thousands and thousands of others to do the same. So thank you. I'm so grateful.
Thank you. I'm grateful that you had me.
There's so much to learn from Fawn Weaver's story. She has blended her insatiable curiosity and innately rebellious spirit into a brand that is growing at an incredible pace. If you want to learn more about the story of Nearest Green, Fawn's book is Love and Whiskey, the remarkable true story of Jack Daniel, his master distiller Nearest Green, and the improbable rise of Uncle Nearest. I'm Jeff Berman. Thanks for listening.